Hello, Steph Black.
Hi, how are you doing?
I am okay. I am currently as humid as a humid thing on a Tuesday, but that's okay.
That's all right. I'm watching very ominous dark clouds come over Durham currently,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
keep an eye on them.
Ominous. Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's a pleasure to meet you. I have been following you on TikTok for a little while now, and I suppose first and foremost, can you just introduce yourself to the boys and girls at home and everyone else in between, and what it is that you're currently doing in life?
So yeah, my name's Steph Black. I'm originally from Australia, which is where I did my undergrad in archaeology at Macquarie Uni, and I'm now studying my MA at Durham, specifically focusing on the Iron Age of Southeast Arabia. It's currently what I'm living and breathing in the library, is working on my dissertation for it, which is it's fun. I'm enjoying it, I would say.
Yeah, it's a library I'm very familiar with. Yeah. Do people still hide in the bottom floor, like at
I
night?
well, considering yesterday I was just hiding in the bottom floor, I assume other people are also.
Yeah, my strangest day in that library was I came across. I was having a slight panic attack. I went down to the bottom floor because it was nice and cool.
Mm.
Came across because I was sort of going, I'll never be able to publish anything. Came across this thing that was my then dissertation supervisor's first sort of little pamphlet, and I thought, oh, that's quite cute. Went
Ooh.
around a corner and tripped over someone who was in the middle of daily prayers. So
Oh,
yeah, because that's also where people go and pray. So, anyway,
right. Yeah.
that was my experience. Anyway, so regardless, it's that's what you're doing. That's why you're here. But more to the point, as an archaeologist, I'm very curious about this social media TikTok thing. Obviously, I've been doing other forms of social media and public
Mm.
archaeology for a while now, but I'm curious why TikTok and how on earth did you end up doing things on that platform?
So I originally got TikTok in 2019 because I moved to Oxford to work for Oxford Archaeology.
Hmm.
So I didn't know anyone in town. I didn't have a whole lot of money to do anything. So I just downloaded TikTok and started making videos as something fun to do. And I couldn't tell you when I first started posting about archaeology because in my head I was like, archaeology is super niche. Like it's not, no one's gonna watch these videos. One person's gonna watch this and go, "What the hell is she talking about?"
Hmm.
And then I don't know, I guess I just started making them and people enjoyed them and I had people asking questions and different stuff came up. So I
Yeah, yeah.
kept posting about it, I guess, give the people what they want.
Well, also we'll get into some of the stuff that came up momentarily, but actually, in that sense, you say talking about archaeology, etc. But one of the things that I've noticed, and I haven't gone all the way back through your TikTok. That would feel a bit excessive. But something that I have noticed is that actually you do a lot of, I suppose, sort of vibing. It's almost as though you're thinking and looking
Mm,
off to one side, or sort of going
yeah.
with
Mm.
text on screen. Is that something that, as a form of sort of archaeological communication, that TikTok allows you to do? It doesn't
I
expect you
think
to deliver like a lecture or something.
yeah. I mean, you can't give a lecture on TikTok.
No.
I've tried and failed
Hmm.
horribly because no one watches the 200 parts you make. No one's making that effort to go through.
No.
They want, like, really what TikTok works well on, which is a positive because it's how the platform works, but it's a negative and that you have to keep to that format, is they really like that 15-second video. As much
Yeah.
as they promote, you can now post like what 10-minute videos or something. No
Yeah.
one's going on TikTok to watch a 10-minute video. That's
No.
not happening.
No.
So in that way, having text on the screen is good because it keeps people there longer reading.
Hmm.
Some of the ones looking up into space was literally during a lecture I filmed it that I was watching. So I was actually watching my lecture while I had my camera off at the side, but I'm like looking. So
Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
there's a reason for that. Yeah.
Does that mean then that people are always on the lookout for when it is that you are filming?
I don't think so, no, because that one was
Like
like
they don't walk
this was
behind
during
you?
like COVID, so I would just because I held it off the corner because it was just a Zoom lecture.
Hmm.
Um, But yeah, no, I make an effort I film most of my stuff in my bedroom. If I'm sure anyone watches, they will see the same background because it's my bedroom, literally. It is great light, to be honest. I don't know. It's weird to film in public. Like, I see those TikTokers that do a lot of filming or like talking in public, and I'm like,
No.
I hate even like grabbing a clip. Like, people like, I was like, I was going to London, I was going to go to the British Museum. I was like, I should, film some clips inside the British Museum. So stressful. It was awful. I hated it. I was like, no, this isn't happening.
You managed it though. You got some stuff in, the Parthenon marble,
yeah.
etc. Yeah.
When my friend was walking around, I dragged her to the British Museum. I was like, you go off and walk. I'm just gonna stand in a corner and film.
So how does that relate then, do you think, to, because I know we've sort of dived straight in on TikTok and stuff. How does all of this relate to your current sense of being an archaeologist and studying? And also as well, actually, I suppose attached to that would be, I noticed a little while ago that you made a quizzical post where you talked about how a senior member of staff had realised that you were on TikTok and had been watching some of your stuff, and you're a bit kind of like, so how does this relate to that? And can I just give you some context for that question? The reason why I ask is that, in my experience, it's been quite hard to get, particularly female archaeologists and academics, to really engage with the notion of having a sort of a social media presence without it being potentially a risk to their career. And actually, it's often quite difficult to get people. I very deliberately try now to get more women than men on interviews. But previously, I used to give up at the first hurdle because it would be a case of no, because people won't take me seriously. So how does it relate to you as an archaeologist, but also how other people see you?
I don't know, to an extent, how people like outside, I feel, of my little bubble see it, because a lot of people I interact, like, I've worked some of the open days at Durham, so I've been recognized a couple of days at open, and people are like, oh, you're the archaeologist on TikTok. And I'm like, and they're like, I'm here to study archaeology. And like, I've had actually quite a few people reach out to me on TikTok or like through Instagram DMs going, hey, what's it been like studying at Durham? Would you recommend it? So in that way, it's kind of been, I feel it's been good. I've loved it, my time at Durham, so I can only give it compliments. But I don't know. It was very odd. It was just like a dinner I was at after a talk, and all of a sudden it was like, I was emailed your video from TikTok, and I was like, who is this person who's emailing you? For what purpose have they emailed you? And like, I don't think I said anything bad. I don't know, maybe I do self-censor a little bit potentially, because I'm like, wow, it's not just my little bubble that's seeing it. Because for a long time it was like, I didn't set out to get a platform. No. Even now saying I've got a platform sounds so bizarre, because to me, in my head, it's just me sitting in a room making stupid videos about things that I find funny. And if 10 people like it, if one person likes it, I'm like, okay. But in a way, it's almost not for the audience that I'm doing anything. Even though, if people like ask questions, I'll like answer them or I'll try and do stuff. But ultimately my account's for me. So, but there is that always sort of niggle in the back of your head of like, what are people going to think when they see this, and how is it going to be? Because I do know where I want to specialize. It is a very small, archaeology is a small world, and Southeast Arabian Iron Age is an even smaller world, as can be seen by my reference list currently, which is the same names repeated over and over again. So, yeah, I'm just hoping maybe that people are not interested in TikTok and they don't want to understand it, and they're happy to leave it to younger people so people don't look too closely. Because I think a lot of younger people are very chill about it, especially people who've grown up with internet, have grown up with social media. Like, as much as I was told as a child, you got to be really careful what you post on social media. Like, don't post things, don't post your face, don't do this. And now look at me. And I feel like that generation who has grown up with that is understanding of it, and they do find it as a way of engagement. Like, I've connected with a whole bunch of other history and archaeology people. We have a WhatsApp group because we're all doing postgrad degrees, and we're all chatting and like talking about conferences and who's going to which conference, and what's happening and people talking about PhDs because most of the masters and that kind of stuff. So in a way, it's been quite good networking for me, not going to lie. It's been the best networking opportunity.
Yeah, well, and so therefore, actually, to flip that question on its head, is that something then that you would actually recommend? Is that not so much that people who would be uncomfortable try and do TikTok, but rather that they see these as what used to be, long distance communications between interested colleagues or back and forth in journal pages. Now you can have a much more sort of immediate feedback, but also as well, frankly, you can have random people reach out to you. For example, I saw the other day that you were quite touched when someone said that they were going to study archaeology because of your posts, which was quite lovely. Yeah,
I know I've had quite a few messages like that, and I'm like, oh, I feel like I need to warn people and be like, don't take every video I do as a positive thing. Don't just go into it because you see one person on TikTok, you're like, that's cool, because I feel like that's kind of how I got into archaeology. But yeah, I'm always a bit like, guys, don't jump into it too quickly. Look before you leap.
So what got you into archaeology then?
When I was like 8, I read a book series called Cairo Jim, and it was about this guy who went on all these fantastical adventures, and he was an archaeologist, and he had a wonder camel called Brenda who'd eaten the Encyclopedia Britannica, and he had a talking macaw called Doris, and at 8 years old, that makes perfect sense. You're like, absolutely. And he had an arch nemesis called Neptune Flannel Bottom Bone, and as a child, who had his companion was a raven called Desdemona who liked tin seaweed.
Okay.
Bizarrely. Again, at 8 years old, I went, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, where else would the camel get the hump? It's a book, it's, yeah.
Yeah,
well, lots of books.
So I was really into, and that whole idea of going on an adventure, and I think that was what really attracted me. And I went, I want to be an archaeologist. And then it kind of, went away. I was doing stuff for high school and whatever. And my mom was like, you've got to decide what you're going to do in your future. And me being the 16, 17-year-old teenager was like, don't tell me what to do, Mom. Don't tell me. Don't have a logical thing that I should have some plans for my future. No. And I went into my room and I saw that a local university was starting an archaeology degree. And I went, don't need to learn a language, get to study history. Okay, sounds good. And I chose my major of anthropology because it's what Bones studied, and I was watching Bones at the time and addicted to it. So it was a very deep and, as you can tell, well thought out,
very
logical reason for choosing my degree.
So has archaeology sort of lived up to the hype then?
Well, I've yet to get an arch nemesis who wears a fez and has a raven, but I certainly feel like I've gone on adventures, because that's what I've always enjoyed, like in visiting other countries. And that's been the great thing about archaeology. I've done it in so many different places. I've met so many interesting people who are also studying interesting stuff. And if I'd stayed in Australia, and as my mother keeps saying, you could just come back and work in an office, I wouldn't have had those experiences.
No.
So, yeah.
Well, speaking of experiences, obviously, one of the ways in which people know you is because of you say you don't have an arch nemesis, but you certainly had someone who you're interacting with a lot in a very forthright way on the TikTok platform, discussing the topic of human remains and sort of transfer and sale and movement and this kind of thing. How's that going for you? And also, how's that going for the platform? Because now there are a few people who are very much hot on that topic. But what's the state of play at the moment in terms of people glamorizing?
At the moment, he's got a new spine wall. I got tagged in a video about that because, I don't know. I feel it was a difficult situation because my big focus was on the fact that he was selling an indigenous skull. It was like, technically it's legal what he's doing, the sale of human remains. And it's like, I know technically the indigenous person, isn't from North America, so it's not covered under their protections, but it's still an indigenous person. And that was something which a lot of people were ignoring, like when I saw the media reporting on it, because kind of when I made those videos in August last year, so coming up to a year since I made that original video, that kind of the video itself didn't go super viral. Like I've had other videos that have done a lot better, but I think a lot of people then started talking about that. And so then there was a lot of media put on the spotlight of that other account, and it was kind of just like, hey, it's creepy you're selling human remains. And I was like, no, there's that whole other level of him selling an indigenous skull. And also the fact he knew he was doing something wrong because he removed that straight away from his account. Like it's gone. That no one knows what that skull is. I think because it was a Sami skull, and it was during that time that I actually had some Sami people reach out to me that I'm now friends with on the platform, and I'm really grateful that because I'm always conscious as like a non-Indigenous person speaking on those kind of issues. So I think to have them come on and be like, hey, thanks for speaking about this, I was like, okay, like I don't want to overstep my boundaries. And like he said it either wasn't Indigenous or he'd given it back or something, but then he's never released anything officially on his platform. And I'm like, I'm in the UK, there's not too much at this point. It was just more like occasionally I'll make another video and be like, hey, he's still got that skull. Or we don't know what. And the thing is, I don't know what's happening with that. He's still selling bones, still chugging along, really.
Which is interesting. I mean, I suppose two things come to mind. I mean, one of the questions I knew I was going to sort of inquire with you about was whether or not your upbringing in Australia and presumably your first degree gave you a sensitivity to Aboriginal and Native first peoples or various names issues when it comes to human remains. Was that part of it, or do you think this is actually a broader sort of I don't know, almost sort of moral or justice kind of issue?
My degree didn't touch on Indigenous stuff at all. Like I got a degree in Australia and I studied not a dot of Australian archaeology, not colonial archaeology, and not like pre-contact anything. The really only stuff we spoke about was like in my first year about Mungo Man, and my lecturer was annoyed that they'd had to give it back. He was from France and he was annoyed, and we were all there in class going, because I don't know, I feel like there's something about being Australian and like you're kind of raised knowing about what happened to the Indigenous people. And, you kind of, it's in the newspapers. I feel like there's an awareness amongst Australians, I feel, that I've noticed isn't so much present in like Europeans in the way that so there isn't that kind of Indigenous and you've come in, like, if you speak to someone from the UK whose, family dates back to the Celts, whatever, even the Romans, the Viking, people are like, well, I'm British. And I'm like, well, I'm Australian, but then there are different parts of Australia and people who will suffer in different ways. So even though it wasn't part of my degree, I think honestly, the research I did on it when I first spoke about the sale of the Sami skull, because I just got one question on TikTok. I thought I'd just make a video going, yeah, it's a bit creepy, it's not illegal. And then I was scrolling on his website and I was like just seeing what he was selling in general. Feels cheap what it is going for, the rates. I don't know. I feel like skulls should be more than a couple of thousand. That's just me personally. And then I saw that Sami skull and I was like, wait, this is different to what I thought like my original video was going to be. So I definitely think though it's something that archaeologists need to tackle. And here's the thing, I don't know whether being on social media is necessarily the right thing to do, because I know a lot of people sometimes say that you shouldn't engage with anyone. Like, then there's a lot of conspiracy theories on TikTok that get very popular. Like some people would look at my account and go, it's a healthy size. It's not a small account. But then in comparison to these conspiracy theories accounts, I'm a tiny fish. And all of us archaeologists are tiny little fishes, even the biggest of us, compared to people who've got like, 10 million followers going, aliens built the pyramids. Woo! So
it's an interesting one, actually. And I'll come back to that in a second, but it is interesting and a little bit disheartening to see someone turn up, for example, here on YouTube, make an account discussing whether or not aliens cut the granite in Egypt for certain statues, and get like within 18 months to 2 years 250,000 subscribers. You're just like, what? But I think I feel as though, and just observing how that conversation sort of played out with you, but also with other people, I feel as though surely it must be good. It must be a good thing to have the counterpoint out there, I suppose.
That's how I see it. Like it's worth, I think even if, because I see a lot of people saying, there's no point in engaging.
Yeah.
And I'm like, because I reached out to an academic because her article had been used as further proof that the Catholic Church had invented Rome because Vesuvius had never erupted.
Sorry.
And all they'd done is they'd studied some ice cores in Iceland, and they figured out the dating was a bit wrong. And they were like, look, this ash or whatever actually doesn't come from Vesuvius. It comes from a different volcanic eruption.
Yeah.
And I was like, and in this email, I was like, this feels so ridiculous. I won't email someone for help with my dissertation. I'm too scared to ask for anything professional. For a TikTok video, I'll email. And I was like, you know what? And I emailed and I went, hey, just to check, you're not saying that Rome didn't exist. All you're saying is this ash didn't come from Vesuvius and we need to change the dating of ice cores or whatever. And she went, like, obviously not. What are you talking about? And like, kind of don't engage with conspiracy theorists. But for me, I was like, I wasn't making like my response video in a way for the creator who made that, because I know she's not going to change her mind. She's very set in her ways that it's a huge Catholic Church, Dan Brown conspiracy, that Rome is fake, Latin is a fake language, whatever. I was making it for like my audience to be like, hey, this is what the article's actually saying, because I think it's a disservice to the researchers, the people who put that work in there, the people who've published, for their work to be misinterpreted in such a way. And so I was to be like, hey, this is actually interesting research. This is changing this whole dating system. It's going to push dates around. This has big impacts in this area.
Yeah.
Like, diminish it down to a conspiracy theory, I'm like, the research deserves better.
Yeah, it cheapens it, and also, I suppose in that sense, it's an opportunity for an interesting case study of what a floating timeline is, and I suppose if, for example, Stonehenge being the biggie, every week it seems someone has some new idea about that monument, but if I can't help but feel, especially on these sort of platforms, that if there's nothing else there, anything can fill that void. Anything can fill the vacuum. And so at the very least, people know that there's someone who might not like the idea of skulls being traded, or there's someone who is countering this notion that Rome didn't exist, which is, I saw that, I didn't engage. I just thought, no, I'm not going to. I've got too many little debates on the boil.
You've got to pick your battles, definitely. Yes. And there's some you're like, you know what? When it's such a delusional conspiracy, you're like, I'm never going to convince you, because you have no matter what you say, it's like they're constantly moving the goalposts.
Yeah.
And there were like full on classics professors that she was like calling out and attacking, who were like, this is my whole career. Like, I think I would know if it was fake. And it's all, you're being controlled by, big history or whatever. And you're like, I wish big history was controlling me. Maybe, I'd be able to get some better groceries and not be living on lentils. Please, big history, where are you? Sponsor me.
Yeah. I could get that sweet sellout money. Yeah.
Please.
Do you feel as though there is hope for these sorts of conversations and for this sort of interaction with the public? Because one of the first questions I saw really being asked about, especially archaeological academics interacting with people via, for example, Facebook groups, was this question of so-called academic authority. And so people would say, well, how will people know what is real if anyone can have a Facebook page? How do you feel the future of these sorts of conversations will pan out? I'm not asking you to literally predict, but how do you feel about it? Do you think this is a useful way of working even?
I think it is. I think it's a really good tool of engagement, because I think it helps make academics and archaeology seem more approachable. Because in my perception of archaeology is a very working class subject, especially when you're going to something like commercial archaeology. You are like, you're laboring, you're putting your blood, sweat and tears to try and literally pull answers from the earth and interpret. So to me, it's that great mixture of being able to have those academics, but then being able to do that physical work. But I feel like the general public's like, oh, all archaeologists are 19th century treasure hunters going out, blowing up some stuff, and just destroying everything, and there's no like respect. And that's what I see a lot of people going, oh, well, you don't respect like Indigenous people or, minority communities and that, because archaeology has been used as a tool of colonialism, as a tool of white supremacy, very, very much so in our very recent history, it's been used. And so I think to sort of stand there and go, well, no, actually, like a lot of archaeologists do want the Parthenon marbles returned to the Parthenon. I would say I would hazard a healthy majority would like to see them returned.
I think so.
There are big conversations within the archaeological history museums communities about the purpose of museums and what they should be doing, and places like the British Museum and other such institutions like the Met, because people see the Mummy, they see Indiana Jones, and they're like, aha, that is an archaeologist. And it's like, it's a lot more boring than that. It doesn't show all the paperwork you've got to do. And that there is a lot of respect, which I think is what is archaeology's great strength, is to be able to go on a site and see the way people treat the past with respect.
Yeah.
Which is something I think, to communicate to people, that we're not just out there swinging a pickaxe willy-nilly into people's skulls and, just digging for the treasure.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a curious thing as well that you mentioned the British Museum. One of the things I often find myself pushing back on is the idea that the BM is a monolithic institution. There are people who work there who are extremely passionate, extremely ethical, and also who do want to have the Parthenon marbles returned. It's just not, they can't post them, they can't box them and send them off. So these issues deserve a nuance, I suppose. But do you think though that because you were saying that the the perfect TikTok video is like 15 seconds long. Is there room for nuance in this, or do you build nuance with, like, is it like a little dots on an impressionistic canvas? You sort of build a pattern.
A little bit, yeah. Like, I know if I do an explanation video, if I sit and I'm like, okay, here are the facts, I've read the academic articles, even if when I was doing like the 3-minute ones, because I've majorly stopped 3-minute videos, kind of max I go up to is maybe a minute for a video, because they just don't get the same engagement. And I'm like, I'm putting that effort into in a way for people not really to see it. It's like, I'd rather focus on the little ones, and then if people do have questions, I more focus on answering people's questions about stuff, rather than just being like, I'm going to make a long video on this topic. Because you do, and like, I know now to an extent what videos are going to do well, what's the type of videos, specifically the content of videos that are going to do well. And so I know if I do like a certain type of content, it'll then boost views on like the next maybe 4 or 5 TikTok videos that I do. So I'll sometimes plan it out. I'll be like, okay, I'll do this video now. I know that type will hopefully, and it's not 100% foolproof, but you get like an idea. I'll do that one, and then I can post some other ones that are a little bit more informative. So that's kind of, it's a little bit of having to understand the algorithm, understand the system, and then also understand why people have followed you. Because, if you get like a viral video that, gets to like 1 million views, you're going to get followers, but they're going to follow you from that video. If most of your content isn't like that video, they're not going to be interested because they were interested in that type of content. So in a way, I put out stuff that I like and what I enjoy, but I am to an extent also thinking about, well, how are they going to like it? Which in a way I like, because it helps me be creative. I'm like, oh, I want to talk about this. And it's like, okay, well, how am I going to talk about that in a way that's going to engage people? I spend, I save so many trending audios on TikTok and just go through them. And I think of the trends and I'm like, okay, that trend, how can I twist it a little bit so it fits what I want to say? Just change it a little bit. If people are like talking about their boyfriend that they really like, there's a lot of trends that it's the same type of thing that comes round. You see it. People will do one about like their boyfriend or girlfriend, partner, whatever, whoever they love. And I'll be like, oh, archaeology, I love you, or a specific period of time, or I'll talk about historical figures during that time, because the Tudors will always get views and Cleopatra will always get a view. So, you just throw that out there.
So Okay, so actually, what you described there is almost sort of nuance by stealth. You kind of you
Mm,
kind of bait people along into the nuance, but also keep their attention, and yeah. Okay.
yeah.
So do you feel as though as in a non spammy way, do you feel as though almost as though you're sort of fishing for people's attention? That sounds more mercenary than I intend
Mm,
it to be, but you know what I mean. Do you feel as though
yeah.
you're sort of putting breadcrumbs out, and people will and hopefully pick up some of the interesting stuff as well?
Well, it's more also trying to see what people are interested in because sometimes
Mm.
I'll put out a video and I'll be like, oh my God, this is the most hilarious video ever made. I'll be chuckling to myself as I'm posting it, going, I'm a genius. And then like 50 people will like it. And I'm like, and it'll get like less than 1,000 views. And I'm
Mm.
like, oh, I thought I was a genius for this. Apparently I'm not, it's very humbling. And then, like even the video I made back in last August about that whole Sami skull situation,
Mm.
like I literally was in my bedroom filming it. Like I think I was like researching right before bed. I saw the skull and I was like, oh no, I'll just make the video right now. Literally filmed at like 2 a.m. Went to sleep and like that wasn't planned at all. Like
No.
it was not structured. There was no thought behind it. I posted it like at midnight, which was the worst engagement time for me. Like I did everything wrong. I think if someone in marketing had seen that, they would have been like, no, this isn't how you post the video. And then, look what happened. And people wrote an academic article about that. Like a quote has been published.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Mm-hmm.
you
Crazy.
can't forget.
Well, how about that then? What do you think about this the fact that people can quote TikTok, for example, in an essay?
I I feel like it was very confusing when I found out about it because I don't know if I know what to think about it. Like, obviously, it's flattering, it's a
Mm-hmm.
nice thing to sort of have that acknowledged.
Mm-hmm.
But it was odd because it was so unexpected. It was like, and it felt like because my video was that catalyst because I published it. What was it like? I've looked at the date so much, like so I could get my timeline right. It was like the 11th of August. I posted it, and it was like the 12th, 13th stuff started. I think stuff about his account then started to be
Yeah.
posted on Twitter, which is I think when it then got picked up by other academics. Roughly, I think is the timeline. And then it was kind of for that next week. There was a lot of stuff happening about it, and then
Yeah.
after a week, as social media happens, it turns over. I just thought it was really interesting that it was something unique, like the actual research they'd done and the fact that they were like, hey, we've never seen this before on another social media platform. I was like, oh, like I didn't set out to do something unique. I didn't intend anything. I thought max 20 people will see this and that'll be it.
Mm-hmm.
So it was very, like, from that kind of academic perspective, it was very interesting to actually read their article and see what they'd done. But then also to know that my videos have been downloaded and analyzed and were part of these graphs. And I'm like looking at the graphs going, wait, can I figure out where I am in these graphs? Like,
Mm-hmm.
it was like you're reading like the anonymized descriptions going, wait, am I in here? What's my description?
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's quite interesting. Yeah.
So, I mean, that's interesting. It's interesting. You were saying how this will only get sort of 20 views or something, but as a friend and academic in another field often says to me, it's interesting how now they can post on Twitter and get more interaction, more commentary, and more of a thread going, more data in some ways. Certainly something more satisfying than if they did publish in a journal. Sometimes they may get possibly 5 downloads of an online journal and maybe one person going, "You're rubbish." Like, I suppose I know I'm sort of asking variations on a theme here, but I'm wondering, is there any scope for sort of almost packets of TikTok-like information to be attached to formal research? I wonder if there's anything in that.
I think there could be. I think, TikTok's a great way of spreading information
Mm,
and also like crowdsourcing. I mean, there's been huge pushes for that kind of,
mm,
community scientists and stuff and,
mm,
volunteers and whatever.
mm,
Um, I mean, like even for me, like I've done, because, before you've like written stuff up, you don't want to talk and I'm still interpreting, my dissertation and writing that up. And so I've made kind of very broad, when something's happened, generic stuff. And people have gone, oh, can you tell us more? Like, we're really curious because, it is very small. I have people asking, what books would you recommend to read on this topic? And I'm like, it's academic journals, guys. No one's really written like a general book on this. So for me, once I've done my dissertation, which, hopefully should be, just a month and a bit should be done, is I do want to talk about that because it is a very small area. And I think that's where, scientists, archaeologists, or anyone who studies a very niche area that's niche within their niche, it can be really interesting to see what people talk about. Like, I've been following lots of other creators who talk about tons of different things, like people doing like economics and business, even just other history people, learning all about medieval torture and stuff. Fascinating, things I never would have picked up, but I can watch someone's video and go, oh, hey, depictions of saints in medieval art and the weird homoeroticism of it all. It's not my niche, not really my area of interest, but it's fascinating. And especially when you see someone being interested in their topic and then being excited to share that. That's really cool.
Yeah. Consider supporting ArchaeoSoup on Patreon for as little as $1 per month. Link available in the video description. Thank you. Okay, so rather than yabbering on about social media and archaeology for too much longer, I'll move on to the questions that I ask all the archaeologists that I interview in this series as a point of comparison, because obviously all archaeologists are different, and this is a good way of cross-referencing. And the first question that I tend to ask everyone is, what challenges do you identify on the horizon for archaeology? What do you think is out there?
I think a big thing is retaining staff in archaeology. I don't even think that's on the horizon. I think that's the big issue now. I mean, when I first started in commercial, it was like, we're down 3,000 archaeologists, we need 3,000 more. And it's like, but it's because, as I was told on my first day on the job, you've got 5 years in archaeology before you quit because you either injure yourself so badly you can't work or you can't justify the wages.
Yeah.
Like, every profession. And when people are doing archaeology, people have got 2 degrees. And, if you're on under 25,000, how can you justify getting 2 degrees, especially if you're coming from a more disadvantaged background where maybe you don't have family support to maybe give you that little bit extra till, you get higher up the rungs and stuff, which I think makes archaeology inaccessible to people, especially from a working class background, or anyone who does have disadvantages, of not having that support network. And also,
well, so I was going to say, it's ironic though, isn't it? Because you described the profession a little earlier as being akin to working class. It is hardworking. It is being on the job, and yet it's made inaccessible to those sorts of hardworking people.
Yeah, I do feel like that. Yeah, I know, because I have a friend when I did my undergrad who has been unable to pursue archaeology because she can't afford the costs of going on field school because she has different responsibilities. She's like, I can't take weeks off work, and especially from Australia because we don't have the summer holidays at the same time as Europe. So the time we can go on field school is during our winter break. So it's quite a short period of time, because when we have our long summer break, everyone else is in uni because it's winter. And so she hasn't been able to pursue archaeology because she's had, and she's probably one of many, many people,
Yeah, well, I mean, to be, hands up, I couldn't. There's a reason I haven't got a huge digging experience, and that's because I couldn't afford to. Simple as that. I just couldn't.
It was expensive. Look, the only reason I was able to afford the 3 field experiences I had during my undergrad was because the first one in Italy was fully covered by scholarships, completely covered. And the place where I worked was really good about me taking time off. I just worked as an office assistant. And so I had a really good job where I was able to do that. But I know people who've quit work. The second one, it was equivalent now, £3,000, including flights to go on field school in Poland. That was in Poland. That's a lot of money. And I was away for what was it? 2 weeks, I think. That's a long time to be out of work, especially if you rely on that income. So, it's not only the cost of the field school, but the lost income that you have. you
Yeah,
know.
yeah, and the thing is that's a few months' rent at least. That's
Mm.
potentially part of a house deposit. It's potentially
Yeah,
part of a
it's
deposit
not a
for a
small amount
wedding.
of money.
No.
And that's the
Mm.
thing that I look at some of these field schools and I'm like, the astronomical costs of some. And that's what I've done a lot in my TikToks, because my Spanish friends, when I worked on a field school in Spain,
Mm.
well, I should say Catalonian, they were like, we don't understand why you guys pay for field schools.
Mm.
Like, why all you Americans and you Brits and,
Mm.
you Australians are paying?
Mm.
They're like, when we did our undergrads from the first year, over the summers, it was grunt work. My friend was like, her first field experience was standing in water for hours at a time.
Mm-hmm.
But she's like, you were being paid a little bit, but you were still being paid over your summers for
Yeah.
working as an archaeologist.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, because we're not told anything else.
Yeah.
Because we're told you have to pay thousands to go to field school, and that's just how it is.
Yeah.
And my friends were like, change your Google language to a European one and see what results came up. And I did that. Instantly cheaper field schools, ones that had like a €70 like admin cost.
Mm.
And then you got a whole month in somewhere like Romania or something. And
And
it's like, if you're going to, especially Eastern Europe,
mm-hmm.
and you're paying and you're having each person pay, £2,000, and you have 30 people on the field school. People are living, in the one I was in Poland, we were sleeping in the local public school on the ground on mattresses. We were eating pork and potatoes all day, every day. And you're like, this same money I could live like a king in Poland on, if I went out. In Bulgaria, you can live very well in those countries on, because, the difference in prices. So who is, and part of me is like, where is this money? Like, there's so much.
Mm-hmm.
And like, you look at the tools you've got and it's like, they're old tools, things aren't hugely new. Like, you can see, the dig I went on in Poland, you'd paid thousands to be there. You got there and they were like, for us to give you the Wi-Fi password, you have to pay us another like 10 zloty. So like, nothing in like any currency, but it's like the principle of the thing. It's like, okay, well, why isn't the cost of the Wi-Fi factored into the thousands I've already spent? If I've spent these thousands, why doesn't that include Wi-Fi? Like, why are you now asking for cash in hand? Like, it's just odd,
Well, it's all going into big heritage.
Mm.
That's the answer, and then they pay people off, not to talk about aliens.
Obviously that's how it works, definitely.
Totally. No. I see what you mean, and it's interesting that it's about it. What you've described there is culture. It's the culture, and the culture, I think, probably has to change if there's going to be a long-term survival. Because in that sense, everything else that we've talked about it's serious stuff. The interactions between good learning and the public, between the ethics of handling human remains and the sale of human remains. All this stuff is serious stuff. And it's more than just, I suppose, apple pie and custard. It's more than just nice,
Yeah.
And so I think it probably deserves an adequate structure for people to be able to progress and be able to go into that field and be able to do it properly. If that's a challenge that's not so much on the horizon, then that's very much present. It's been present for probably as long as I've been alive. What would you say to an archaeologist who is interested in getting into archaeology then? I mean, they could be from Australia, they could be from wherever in this instance. But that's my second question in these instances.
I would say, don't go into it thinking, this is going to be a lot of money. Have sidetracks and do your research. Find out where in archaeology the money is. I know so many people, like when I worked in commercial, had done osteoarchaeology and yet had never dug a skeleton in the 3 years they've been working for the company, because there were so many people who had that master's that they couldn't do it. And I'm like, look, it is interesting, skeletons. And I feel like I've got a reputation now on TikTok for being a skeleton. It's like, I have never studied like any professionally osteoarchaeology. I mean, I've taught it at field school, which is a whole other issue that I think exists in archaeology. But I've never learned it formally at university. So don't think, oh, archaeology is this glamorous thing. Sometimes it's doing the geomatics, and find what works for you. So like the GIS is huge, digital archaeology. And I know especially in Australia, there's a lot of movement away from excavating. Like when I interviewed for some commercial companies in Australia and I was like, oh, what tools do you need? They laughed and went, oh, that's very European of you to say that. Like basically they have a water bottle and a hat and a compass and they go out and survey. It's a lot of surveying because it's indigenous stuff and there's a lot of ethics around excavating that, so it doesn't happen as much. But there is, and I think that is also what I want to talk about, is like that push away from just going out and digging. I think there's a lot of good stuff that can be done for preventative when just leaving stuff in the ground, as technology's advancing in leaps and bounds. My master's I'm currently doing is just on a 5-year survey that was done. There was minimal excavation, I think, that was done more to understand the geology, that nothing was really at all was excavated for the archaeology, and you already know so much.
Well, and in that sense, it's becoming less and less necessary, yes, to interfere with archaeological digs, but also I feel as though things like so recently, for example, there was a big furore over whether or not academics have so-called trigger warnings ahead of discussions surrounding human remains. But what's interesting there is that what you've just described is the fact that actually it's possible to have, well, of course, it's possible to have an archaeological career and not interact with human bones. But you could count seeds, for goodness sake. And if your lecture has in it, a mass grave, for example, there's going to, I suppose this an acknowledgement that this stuff, for the most part, isn't normal. Actually, it's possibly a good way to start.
Rare.
Yeah.
In commercial, like if in people like, oh, you guys are just digging up bones everywhere. I'm like, no. The one time I dug on commercial, the only reason I dug, even though I was the most junior on site, was because no one else had experience. The supervisor didn't like human bones. And he was like, you've got a bit of experience, do it, because they didn't expect it. The bulldozer literally took off that layer and they're like, oh, there's a skeleton here. It's raining. We need to do something about this. So, it wasn't expected. Like the sites where they do expect, where they know there are going to be human remains, they send out the professionals, the people that want to do that type of work. If it's, I think people are like, oh, to be an archaeologist, you have to deal with human remains. And it's like, not at all. Not, you can go your whole career, because bones don't last that well. It's to an extent. You need good conditions. It needs to be the right conditions. And, unless you're digging a cemetery and then a shocked you're going to find human remains, that's on you. But you can very easily do your whole career and not touch a single bone.
Exactly. And also as well, I'd love to see some of these journalists just sort of transposed, maybe sort of Star Trek beamed into an archaeology lab, just for a couple of seconds, and see what happens to them. Because I've said this many times in various places, but I've seen people faint. People who would be like, "Ha, whatever, just bones," go into the room and then they collapse, because sometimes it can be a real confrontation. Speaking of confrontation, is that part of what drives? And I'm also painfully aware that we haven't talked remotely about Iron Age Southern Arabia. But is that unfortunately part of what drives elements of these conversations and how people think about what archaeologists do? Is this sense of, because what you've just been describing, but also what I see a lot online, are people who are essentially quite accusatory. They sort of say, "What's the difference between you and a grave robber?" Nothing, that kind of thing. Is a sort of openness a tool of sort of diffusing some of these sorts of conversations?
I think so. And being honest and being like, well, this is why, because the company I worked for didn't deal with human remains that were before earlier than 100 years. That was kind of their cutoff limit. They're like, that's not our realm. And I think educating people that there are laws, like, oh, you're just going out and digging stuff up. And it's like, no, if it's a Church of England burial, you need to get so many permissions. It's, even for that one skeleton that I dug, that just popped, it was like an Iron Age roundhouse, and there was a couple of cremations and then just a skeleton there, and it was crumbling. It was in bad condition. It wasn't, it was literally a bag of dirt by the time it was there was nothing. and people are like, oh, you should leave it to rest. And it's like, but it's just going to be bulldozed. And then I had someone respond and go, what? The people just bulldoze remains? And it's like, well, they've got planning permission to be there. So if it's just one skeleton, take it out of the ground and hopefully rebury it somewhere or send it to the local museum or something. I would like to see stuff reburied, like not just the Church of England stuff. I think a lot of bones can be, once they've been studied, it's worth, putting people back.
Yeah, well, it's funny. I can't help but think that this is something else that archaeologists could be doing, is actually providing a generalized sort of point of contact with notions of what happens to human remains. So, for example, it wasn't until we had a family bereavement a couple of years ago that I learned that that my dad's grave, so my dad died quite a long time ago, has 100-year lease on it.
Oh.
So, and apparently this is not uncommon. You can be buried in the UK, at least. I don't know about other places. And technically, and I think this is where it comes in, technically, the grave plot can be used for someone else unless you renew that lease. Now, who does the renewing is an interesting question.
Especially after 100 years.
Yeah.
Like, surely it would be like potentially your great-grandchildren who will even more.
If they know where you are. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, yeah, I have no idea about that.
No, it's very interesting, and initially it bothered me. I was like, oh my god, what do I have to like? I have to check now? But then I thought, no, because no one is going to want to reuse this because it's weird.
It's a bit weird, yeah.
But the rule is there, and the provision is there, and I think. I think that's one of the. I mean, never mind things like long-term climate modeling. He says, wiping sweat from his brow, but also I think stuff like having a not necessarily religious interaction with what happens with human remains, or indeed one that is sensitive to various religious approaches, is something that archaeologists I think could and should be doing. Check your grave leases, people.
Apparently,
you never know. Okay, so what's next for you then? I mean, what's next on TikTok? What's next also in your obviously you mentioned your dissertation, but also I saw recently somewhere, it might have been on TikTok or elsewhere. I haven't been stalking you. I just saw it somewhere. You said something along the lines of you feel as though you've partly in some ways became known for being that gal who got into a fight with a guy who has a spine wall. I know you're wondering what happens next. Well, what does happen next? Have you figured that out?
Oh, I don't know. I'm kind of hoping once I get my dissertation done, and then like my supervisor's been speaking about publishing that, because it will, spoiler alert, will rock the world of Southeast Arabian Iron Age. It's going to blow it open. Oh my God. It's a very specific niche. I would kind of like to share it more with people and like also explain more about what it's done, because it is very generic.
Okay.
Because they're just all hush hush about whatever they're doing. And yeah, I don't mind being known for the bones person. I just feel like I need to put maybe a PSA like, I am also not an expert in bones. I just am an archaeologist and have basic human empathy.
Yeah.
As you can too.
Shock horror, yeah.
Yeah.
So presumably then you can't, because what I was going to say then was, if you could tell someone anything about the Iron Age of Saudi Arabia, what surprising thing would you tell them? But are you not allowed to mention it?
Stuff was happening. I think that's the big thing, because I made a video, again, very generic, just being like, oh, I'm studying like the Iron Age of this period, this sort of like the area I'm in Oman basically, and I feel like maybe my next thing is I need to visit Oman, because it feels bad to be doing my master's and then in September I'm starting my PhD on kind of this region, and I'm like, I spent half an hour in the country because I was crossing the border to go back into the UAE. Like,
I got this region magnet.
I feel bad, but I had some comments of people from that Gulf region being like, oh, I didn't realize we had an Iron Age. And I was like, in my head, I was like, of course you guys had an Iron Age. Everyone had an Iron Age. Most people did. Like, there's been, everyone has a history. People come from somewhere. And I think like when I first went out on and did field work and I told people, oh, I'm going to Dubai, they were like, why? It's only been there for 10 years. Like, why is there any arc? It's like, well, there were people there beforehand, like the cities didn't just pop up. These sheikhs didn't just suddenly appear on the edge of the desert and went, I'm going to build a city. They have a very long history.
Yeah.
There's the whole history of Islam, but then what interests me is that pre-Islamic period, that period that we don't know. And I said when I went into archaeology, I didn't want to study prehistory. I wanted to study a people who had a written language. And here I am studying a people without a written language who we're not even, like, researchers aren't even sure who are the people here. Like, they have some names that, like, because the Mesopotamians wrote everything down of people they traded with, and they're like, oh, we think these names are associated with here, but then I saw some other people arguing and saying, no, it's more northern Arabia. So we don't even know what other people called these people, let alone what they called themselves, which in a way is frustrating. And it would be nice to know a little bit more, but at the same time, it's really exciting.
Welcome to prehistory.
It's great. It's so good.
Nothing to hold on to.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah. So
okay.
no, I'm just.
So presumably people should be sort of watching with bated breath for whatever it is that you're going to announce. When you've discovered like an alien landing port or something. Who knows? No, big history. They're going to get me. I suppose finally, is there anything else that you'd like to say? Have I done you an injustice in any way? Is there any other topics or notions or things?
I think it's been okay. Yeah. I know. I don't think I ever expected this to happen from my TikTok when I started it in 2019 in the hostel bathroom where I was living. That if you go back really early on my account, that's what you'll see. The background is the hostel bathroom because it was winter in Oxford and cold, so I didn't want to go anywhere. So I just filmed TikToks. So that's if you go back far enough.
In a bathroom, high quality echo, I imagine.
It was amazing.
Beautiful
so good.
Echo.
Definitely wasn't awkward when you'd be there, like, because that was when I was trying to do TikTok dances. So I'd be in there trying to learn the dances, and someone would like walk into to use the loo, and I'd be there like,
excuse me. Are you doing this again? We've had this conversation. Well, thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure, and I'll continue to follow you and keep up the wistful looking off of to the side of the camera.
I'll just hold the camera and I'll
What's a good sort of face for that? I mean, what are you thinking when you do
this is the face you have to do. You have to do the slightly quizzical.
Sort of.
Considering, imagine you're standing on the mountaintop. It's windswept.
I see. Okay.
Looking out over the landscape.
Yeah. Okay.
Perfect. You've got the look.
Thank you. I try to avoid the blue steel. Sort of. Like that's not the one. That's not it.
No.
So we're talking nonsense now. Thank you so much.
That's all right.
Obviously, I'll link below to relevant social media stuff. If you have any thoughts, questions, or ideas for Steph, please do comment below. If you wanted to confirm that alien spaceport, I suppose just keep on watching her TikTok. I'm sure it'll happen soon. But anyway, thank you guys for watching. Thank you, Steph, for your time. Until next time, take care, guys. Bye.
I'm sorry to say it's speared me. I broke it. It wasn't particularly wet. Hello.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a
in the drawing box.
Okay.
Thank you.